Hi, 8th graders. It's Mr. Castleman here with another video. We're going to be reading Chapter 4, Sections 1, 2, and 3, and then doing the ISN notes for Sections 2 and 3. So what you need is your Chromebook on TCI opened up to Chapter 4, as you can see on the left side of the screen there, Section 1, and then you're going to need your ISN. You can see it on the right side of your screen, and then something to write with. So let's start reading Chapter 4, Section 1. Introduction. In 1723, a tired teenager stepped off a boat onto a wharf in Philadelphia. He was an odd-looking sight. Not having luggage, he had stuffed his pockets with extra clothes. The young man followed a group of clean-dressed people into a Quaker meeting house. Remember, that's a religion, the Quakers, where he soon fell asleep. The sleeping teenager with the lumpy clothes was Benjamin Franklin. He had recently run away from his brother James's print shop in Boston. When he was 12, Franklin had signed a contract to work for his brother for 9 years. But after enduring James's nasty temper for 5 years, Franklin packed his pockets and left. In Philadelphia, Franklin quickly found work as a printer's assistant. Within a few years, he had saved enough money to open his own print shop. His first success was a newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette. In 1732, readers of the Gazette saw an advertisement for Poor Richard's Almanac. An almanac is a book published annually, that means every year, that contains weather predictions, planting advice for farmers, and information on other useful subjects. According to the ad, Poor Richard's Almanac was written by Richard Saunders and printed by B. Franklin. Nobody knew then that author and printer were the same person. Franklin also printed proverbs or wise sayings in his almanacs. Some, like these, are still remembered today. A penny saved is a penny earned. Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Fish and visitors smell in 3 days. Poor Richard's Almanac sold so well that Franklin was able to retire at age 42. A man of many talents, he spent the rest of his long life as a scientist, inventor, political leader, diplomat, and national postmaster. And I would add that Ben Franklin is also on the $100 bill. Franklin's rise from penniless runaway to wealthy printer was one of many colonial success stories. In this chapter, you will learn what life was like for people throughout the colonies in the 1700s. Okay, so that's section 1. That's the introduction. Now we're going to turn to section 2 of chapter 4. Okay, so section 2 is called Life on a Farm. The colonists developed an economy based on farming, commerce, which is buying and selling goods, and handcrafts. That means small goods that people make themselves. 9 out of 10 people lived on small family farms. Most farm families raised or made nearly everything they needed. One farmer wrote with pride about a typical year, "Nothing to wear, eat, or drink was purchased, as my farm produced all." The first and hardest task facing farm families was to clear the land of trees. The colonists had only simple, basic tools. They cut down trees with axes and saws. Then they used the same tools to cut square timbers and flat planks for building houses, barns, and fences. Imagine living on a colonial farm. Your home is a single large room with a fireplace at one end. In this room, your family cooks, eats, and sleeps. Your parents sleep in a large bed built into one corner. Your younger brothers and sisters sleep in a smaller trundle bed, a bed that can slide under the big bed during the day. At bedtime, you climb a ladder next to the chimney to sleep in an attic or a loft. As your family grows, you help to build another room on the other side of the chimney. The fireplace is the only source of heat for warmth and cooking, So keeping a supply of firewood is important. The fire is kept burning all the time because without matches, it's very difficult to light a new one. Cooking is one of the most dangerous jobs on your farm. Food is cooked in heavy iron pots hung over an open fire. While lifting or stirring these pots, your mother might burn her hands, scorch her clothes, or strain her back. Your day on the farm starts before sunrise. Everyone wakes up early to share the work. Chores include cutting wood, feeding animals, clearing land, tending crops, building fences, making furniture and tools, gathering eggs, spinning thread, weaving cloth, sewing clothes, making candles and soap, cooking, cleaning, and caring for babies. So a lot of things that you have to do on the farm. All right, so that was section 2. Now we're going to do the reading notes for section 2. So you're going to look on the right side of the screen. You're going to flip over so we get to page 2. All right, so here's page 2. It says section 2. Now a couple of these questions we're not going to do, so you can cross them out when I cross them out. So first of all, we're not going to do the first question here, so we can just scratch that out. We're also not going to do the last question, question 4. So we're going to scratch that out. Now here's the first question that we're going to take some notes on. So question 2 asks, what proportion of the colonial population lived on small family farms? So what's the proportion of people who lived on small family farms versus living somewhere else, like in cities? So if we remember the notes, it says here that 9 out of 10 people lived on small family farms. That's up here at the top. 9 out of 10. So that's our proportion. So we can write 9 out of 10 people. 9 out of 10 people lived on small family farms. Nine out of 10 people. Now that's a lot of people. That's a huge part of the population. Today, the number of people who live on family farms is very, very small, much smaller than this. But 90% of people in the 1700s lived on small family farms. So most people were, farmers. Okay, next question. List 2 ways that life on a farm in the 1700s was different from your life today. All right, well, there's probably a lot of things you can write for this. Here are 2 things that I thought about. So, one big thing is that trees had to be cleared. And you had to do the clearing yourself before you could build roads and homes. So trees had to be cleared for building anything. Now you might have a different thing that you write in here, but this is just something that I thought of. That trees had to be cleared for building anything. Another way that life on a farm in the 1700s was different from life today was that families were much larger. And everyone helped on the farm. And most people were farmers. So families were much larger and everyone helped on the farm. Okay, so those are the notes for section 2. We just heard about how 9 out of 10 people lived on small farms. That's so many people. And there was so much work to be done on farms that most people, were worked from sun up to sundown, doing all these different things because the farms produced pretty much everything that people needed to live, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's go on to read section 3. So I'm going to go up here, chapter 4, section 3. Now, section 3 is called Life in Cities. In 1750, one colonist out of 20 lived in a city. Compared to the quiet farm life, cities were exciting places. The heart of the city was the waterfront. There, ships brought news from England as well as eagerly awaited items such as paint, carpets, furniture, and books. Just beyond the docks, a marketplace bustled with fishers selling their catch and farmers selling fresh eggs, milk, and cheese. Close by were taverns where food and drink were served. People gathered there to exchange gossip and news from other colonies. The nearby streets were lined with shops. Sparks flew from the blacksmith's block as he hammered iron into tools. Shoemakers, clockmakers, silversmiths, tailors, and other craftspeople turned out goods based on the latest designs from England. There were barbers to cut colonists' hair and wig makers to make it look long again. Cities were noisy, smelly places. Church bells rang out several times a day. Carts clattered loudly over streets paved with round cobblestones. The air was filled with the stench of rotting garbage and open sewers. But the colonists were used to it. Animals ran loose in the street. During hot weather, clouds of flies and mosquitoes swarmed about. City homes were close together on winding streets. Most were built of wood with thatched roofs, like the houses the colonists had left behind in Europe. The windows were small because glass was costly. It cost a lot of money. For lighting, colonists used torches made of pine that burned brightly when they were wedged between hearthstones in the fireplace. Colonists also burned grease in metal containers called Betty lamps and made candles scented with bayberries. With torches and candles lighting homes, fire was a constant danger. Colonists kept fire buckets hanging by their front doors. When a fire broke out, the whole town helped to put it out. Grabbing their buckets, colonists formed a double line from the fire to a river, pond, or well. They passed the buckets full of water from hand to hand up one line to the fire. Then the empty buckets went back down the opposite line to be refilled. Okay, so that's section 3. Now we're going to do the notes for section 3. So if you look over to the right here at the interactive student notebook, once again, we're going to skip a couple questions. We're going to skip this first question. You can just kind of X that out. You can also skip the last question here, question 4. Now, it's a similar question that we're going to answer right now. Question number 2 is, what proportion of the colonial population lived in cities? Now, we're going to do a close reading, right? And we're going to see what it said here. Now, the first line says in 1750, one colonist out of 20 lived in a city. All right, so that tells us what the proportion of the colonial population who lived in cities was. So 1 out of 20 colonists. One out of 20 colonists lived in cities in 1750. One out of 20 colonists lived in cities in 1750. So that's not many at all. Today, way more people live in cities than did in 1750. All right, last question. Use your senses to describe life in a colonial city. Tell what you might see, hear, smell, taste, and touch there. All right, so you guys can think of a number of things. One thing that you might see. Let's think here. So you might write, I see a blacksmith shop. That's a place where metal goods were made. So So I see a blacksmith shop. You might smell an open sewer because they didn't have running water. I smell an open sewer. That means that sewage just ran in the street. Let's see, I hear, what's something that we might hear? You might hear gossip at a local tavern. That's kind of like a bar or restaurant. Think about what you might hear if you lived in a colonial city based on what we read. Write a few things down. Okay, so that's the video. If you need to go back, feel free and take your time as you go through this and read each section and complete the notes for each section. All right, I'll see you soon.